Welcome. You have found the show we call Real Men Don't Cry, or Do They? This is a podcast for men, and on this show, we will hear real-life stories from men about how they have navigated the complexities of being a man in this modern day. We are going to look at the boys don't cry way of thinking and how that has influenced them and how they have risen above societal pressures to be true to themselves. The focus of this show is men's real-world experiences, not just ideas and theories. I hope that you will learn from what they have discovered and use it in your life as well. Let's get into today's show. Don't cry or do they? I'm Brandon Archer, and my guest today, I told him before we started, I'm like, I think I'm actually nervous to interview him, which has not happened with anyone. And I'll explain why the nervousness comes up for me later. But I'd really like to welcome Rafa Rice. Thanks for being here, man.
Absolutely, man. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how we even got on this. I put a shout out on Instagram. Who should I interview? And Kevin McNee, who was on the show, is like, I know a guy. And then we had a call a few days ago, and we're like, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. Rafa, can you just take a little bit of time and explain who you are, where you are?
Definitely. Yeah, that's always a hard question for anybody, right? I just err on the side of explaining to people who I'm becoming at the time. But my background is grew up in Northern California, uh, only child, and joined the military out of high school, 17, and that was just before 9/11. So things got pretty real pretty quick, and spent years coming and going, and traveled quite a bit growing up, which had a big influence on my perspective on life. And then when we got back from overseas, I definitely wanted to get an education. So I went to university, was able to get my degree. A whole bunch of things had transitioned right at that same period of time. And I decided to kind of reboot. I moved, lived overseas, and I've since traveled to dozens and dozens of countries. A very important part of my life, and found my way back to the States eventually. And I'm in the international recycling and shipping industry now, and living out here in Nashville, Tennessee. 41 years old. Um, Partnered with a beautiful woman I grew up with of 7 years now together. No kids, still trying to act like one. So
Still trying to act like one.
yeah.
You said grew up with her. You knew her in your early years in high school?
Yeah, we met when we were like 12.
What?
Yeah.
Dude, that never happens.
She was the girl that got away for like 1,000 of us when she moved unexpectedly, and nobody knew where she went. And then our paths crossed many moons later, and I was like, wow. Yeah.
That just shows how small the world actually is.
That, and or how how much of a plan this is all going according to.
Yeah, fair enough. That's some deep shit, man. Hey, you said something in your intro I was curious about. You said you traveled quite a bit when you were a kid. Was your dad in the military? And how did you end up moving around?
Yeah, so my family, both sides of my family are from Europe. I'm Italian and Spanish. So I had family overseas that we would go visit. My father was in the international trade industry as well. So, I mean, I think my first trip to Asia was when I was 7, and that was to Thailand and Singapore. And I think I've thought about that trip almost every day since. Uh, and got bit by the travel bug, and it's been an itch I have not been able to scratch, closing in on 50 countries, and many of those are about it, 15, 20 times each. So yeah, I'm very, very fortunate to have been able to see the world, and it's just amongst the most humbling things that I get to do on a regular basis.
Hmm. What what stands out for you from when you were 7 that you still think of that first trip?
It was just the juxtaposition between seeing l- life literally on the other side of the world, and coming back with a level of appreciation that I hadn't developed yet because I didn't have the contrast. But literally seeing a beggar with no legs but a smile on his face, grateful for anything he could get. I think I just like emptied my pockets and gave him everything. And the kindness. I had a full head of red hair back then too. I was like a golden child, and they would just rub my head for good luck. And I looked at my very Italian mother and thought, geez, if this was the States, you'd probably break someone's arm. And she's like, it's cool, it's cool.
Interesting, the difference, hey?
Yeah.
Now people just rub your head, thinking it's an 8 ball or what?
Yeah, like a baby elephant or
Yeah.
something.
Oh, man. People that will see the highlights will get why we're laughing about that. Um, so you said you've traveled a lot and you indicated like how that's really given you a unique perspective on the world. I've not had the opportunity to do that, but I can only imagine how that's given you a different slant on life and humanness altogether. How would you explain it to somebody that hasn't had that opportunity?
I love that question. I think about it often too. It's, you know, to truly describe what it's like to travel to somewhere, on the other side of the world or somewhere unique. It's like it's like explaining color to a blind person, you know. That level of it's very experiential. Um, and just like they say, no man can step into the same river twice because he's not the same man and it's not the same river. Even when I go back to places like Thailand, to which I've been probably 20 times, um, I get something different out of it every time. And I realize something different about myself every time. So the familiarity of going back somewhere I've been allows me to kind of track how far I've come since the last visit. But I think the most important piece that I've taken from traveling to so many places, and this really hit hard one point in particular. I was sitting at an airport in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, is realizing for all our differences, we are much more the same. We are much more similar. It's easy to see the different food, the different language, the different music, the different, you know, fashion, architecture, what have you. But at the root of it, we are all extremely similar.
Man, I can feel that one. I can feel that one.
Mm.
You said it's like trying to explain color to a blind person, and something came up for me in that. I've done a lot of work on myself and healed a lot of stuff. I behave differently. And when I try to think, how do I explain to people you can actually change when you're so locked into your way of being and experiencing life? Like, how do I explain that? But I think you nailed it. It's like trying to explain color to a blind person. It's experiential. You got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. There's no substitute for experiencing something ourselves. And certainly with understanding where someone else comes from, uh, exercising that muscle of empathy is an incredible door opener to a whole host of other lessons to be learned. I've come to find, specifically with the world we live in today, which is becoming even more polarized by the day. You know, they they from over there, right? Them who live over there could mean the other side of the world. It could mean the other side of the train tracks. But there's this division that is, um, that is just incessant in our society today. when you actually go to the other side of the world or you cross those train tracks and you sit with these people and you eat with these people and you engage, I mean, there's a lot of illusory uh, confusion that's stripped away.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were sharing, how would you invite people to experience that if they don't get to travel?
Yeah, that's a very that's an important question because it gets to the root of action. I love that. Thank you for that. I would say, you know, think global, act local. Growing up as an only child had a very big impact on me for reasons we may or may not get into in this conversation. But one of them was when anytime I've been going through a transition in my life, I've had a rule where I re-invoke it, and it's go meet 3 people a day. It doesn't matter who. There's been days where I've met the prime minister of a country because I was part of a program that I was working. And I've gotten as much, if not more, out of the Uber drivers I meet, a barista who greets me with a smile on a tough day, like whatever it is. And I'm not saying you have to become best friends, but just like having an engagement, share something, share a transmission. And if I were to see these people again, I may not remember the details or where, but I'll remember that I met them. And that is how I classify having met somebody. So that can be done any day by anyone in your local community. And just giving somebody an opportunity to share with you a little about who they are. And we're going to realize real quick there's a lot of lives being lived.
Man, what do you think's the block in North American society why we don't do that? Why we don't just go meet new people or introduce ourselves at the grocery store?
To put it bluntly, because it's something I overcome every day as well. Nobody's immune. Uh, we're so focused on how people are perceiving us, the lenses on us, like we're on stage at all times, um, that I'll just speak for myself, which I like to do. I can catch myself going into fear of judgment, well, all the fears, all the fears. Seinfeld does that joke about the number one fear being public speaking ahead of number two, which is death. And he says people are more afraid of giving the eulogy than being in the casket.
It's crazy.
It's wild.
Touched on your childhood, and yeah, hell yeah, I want to talk about that. Um, and I don't know where to start with that one. Is there anything you just feel compelled to share before I ask a question?
I mean, I can just give you the basics that I came up in an affluent community in Northern California and uh, went to a very public middle school, which was eye opening. It was an incredible education, but it was also, 1,000 kids with 31 languages spoken when they went home.
Wow.
Incredibly eclectic mix of people and cultures, and just so rich of an environment to expand one's horizon at such an influential time. Um, but what came with that was many, many opportunities on a daily basis to see myself as the other. And that that really drove me to explore what that concept meant. And it caused me a lot of angst, I think, in that recognition at an early age that I was different, that other people were different. Yeah.
That's a massive realization for a teen. What? Wow. You're blowing my mind. So how did your parents kind of, I don't want to say guide you through that. Like, did you go home and go like, holy shit, like I just heard 10 different languages today and I don't know what to do with that. Or any scenarios like that, like how did they help you be a human through this?
I was extremely blessed that both my parents, but especially my father, was so worldly, because when I had those experiences and would come to him, he could normalize it and talk through his experiences around that culture or that country. And so it seemed to me like I was um, discovering things that were meant to be discovered rather than blow my mind, so to speak. And as I would come home with these experiences, he would be like, cool, yeah, let's talk about that. Let's look it up on a map. Let's, look it up in the Encyclopedia Britannica at the time.
Dude, you're aging yourself.
I know. It was my first real jailhouse workout was just moving those across the room. Yeah.
So I think it's fantastic you got to live that and experience that. How did that help you be a better man? And I'm using the word man, not human, on purpose.
Mm, I like the distinction there. Yeah. It That experience, I think, as I'm growing up to be a man, a young man at the time, what's coming to me right now is a sense of responsibility that I may not otherwise have had. A responsibility to build bridges, a responsibility to stay curious. And it was really in my face early on how little I knew about the vastness of experiences being had by my people in my immediate environment, even. And so that right there kept me really curious and anxious to want to know more and to just engage people from that perspective rather than this is who I am, this is what I know, this is where I'm from kind of approach.
Fucking love that, man. I heard two things in there. I heard healthy leadership and I heard humility,
Mm.
which I think's lacking in North American culture, personally.
The universe tends to take care of any absence of humility in a very ruthless way. And I, for one, have caught myself or been caught in periods of my life where I lost some of that humility, and the universe reminded me very quickly.
Yep. It's more than happy to remind you.
Oh, it is just biding time until the opportunity arises.
I just had a personal experience 10 days ago. Something I thought I had healed, a new trigger came up in relationship. I reacted inappropriately and I didn't even see it when I was in it. And then, a couple days later, I'm like, the humility just kicked in. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like this again?
I love
Um,
that you can step outside of it, reflect, and be witness to it, because the problem I've faced, and I think many men face, is they think that 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 lack of humility in that example, or any time that our emotions are overwhelming us, the confusion that we are those emotions, but we're not. It's just something that's happening, not even to us, but just happening through us.
yes. Yeah, and like the reality is I have yet to meet somebody, maybe that person exists, or maybe this is part of the human experience, is that as you work on yourself and you become more aware of yourself and your emotions, it's like to have those occasional reminders to be like, yeah, you're still human. I'm really starting to believe that. It's like, and it makes sense to me.
Mm.
because we're not going to be ever perfect. I don't see how we can be in this human body with the things we've been given. So that humility comes into play. And I bring this up because, oh yeah, I'll talk about I'm going to tie this into my apprehension to, or my nervousness to interview you, is because you're a Marine, and I think Marines are just fucking badass. And the two, I know you, one other, and just, you're also really fucking good humans. And that's not like how I had pictured. I live in Canada, so it's not how I pictured US military men being, to be honest. And the humility part, and I totally lost my thought on the humility part. And
It
I'm just,
comes. It's drilled into us not by the service but by the universe.
yeah. And to see you be, kind of and a lot of, I think even US citizens would be like, yeah, Marine, badass motherfucker.
Mm.
Yet you're balancing it with humility. And I think the distorted picture of a masculine man is like, you don't have that humility. You're just a badass and you don't give a fuck. And
Mm.
that's only part of the equation. You can be a badass and have a ton of humility.
Hmm.
And I think those are the kind of men the world needs. Badass can be defined a bunch of different ways too.
Yeah, some of the most badass Marines I met were female.
Dude, tell
Yeah,
me about that.
I'm thinking about a few right now that I served with, and to the exact point you're making about the perception of, in this case, a Marine, masculine Marine. I was raised around women, anyhow. You know, Italian, Spanish women, mostly Geminis too. So that's like double. And but the female Marines that I served with in particular, if I took one thing from them, it was teaching us how being strong can equate to being flexible. And when you think about that, if something's rigid, it's more inclined to break. If something's flexible, it can bend, it can adjust, it can adapt. And adaptation, especially for a Marine, but in any theater of operation, adaptation is going to save your life. There's a story about an interview that was done with a German general years and years after World War II, asking how was it that the Third Reich, one of the most regimented militaries in history, lost to this ragtag army of misfits that are the US military. And he just very clearly put it. He said, war is chaos. They trained for chaos. When things didn't go our way, we didn't necessarily have a good plan B, but the US military could always adapt. And that's what I learned from the female Marines that I served with. And I take that into my personal life. When something doesn't go my way, I try to look at it and say, you know, what is this trying to teach me? And just try to look at everything as it's happening for me, not to me.
So this is fucking, I love this topic because how, like you said, you learned these female Marines taught you adaptability. What does that equate? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, on a tactical level, it could be, a piece of gear gets left behind, or, a vehicle goes down. Well, duct tape became our best friend over there. And, we always had each other's backs, whether it was within your fire team, your squad, your platoon, other units, even coalition forces when we were over there. Um, but adaptability is just having a can-do attitude, so much so that it's thinking ahead to the end of the mission as being accomplished. The mission's going to get accomplished. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how and when. And if something was a setback, quote unquote, it was just an opportunity to recalculate, redirect, reroute. But we're going forward and we're going to accomplish it.
Did you find men were less adaptable than those female Marines?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. That's a good question. If I was to draw a distinction, because there were plenty of male Marines too that had that strength, but if I had to draw a distinction as to why it was more prevalent in my experience with female Marines that I served with, I would actually just say the nature of a female passing on that type of order, how it was received by the ranks, was viewed a little bit differently, almost like we have this internal knowing that we need to be flexible and that nothing's going to go according to plan. So like our bullshit meter would go off when we had some big, strong, tough officer saying, this is how it's going to go, and rah, rah, we're going to go in for the big win. And on some level, we were all sitting there like, yeah, but how's this really going to go?
So I have a question for you, zooming out just men in general and versus women and where we're at with relationships. Do you think men are too rigid?
I love how direct the question is. I think there's an element of rigidity. I think rigidity comes in different flavors. And I think one of the flavors of rigidity that men these days may be held back by is the thought that they need to do it themselves. The thought that, you know, my accomplishments are only going to be based on my merit and my efforts and my personal achievements. And to get there, I have to do it myself. You know, the distinction between working hard and hard work. I mean, I learned real quick over there that I didn't care who had the best idea. I didn't care what your rank was. A good idea is a good idea, and a bad idea is going to get you shot. So, men being rigid, as I see them these days, is thinking that they have to work hard and that the work itself has to be hard. And it just doesn't.
Well, I don't have an ulterior motive, but I have some thoughts, and I just wanted to see what you came up with, because you shared how if there was a male in the Marines giving an order, he had a very direct, he's like, it's gonna look like this. And that's just not fucking true. And what I experience is men thinking in just relationships, but it's life in general. It needs to look like this. And if it doesn't look like this, I don't know what the fuck to do. And that's where that flexibility thing you mentioned really piqued my interest, because and the fact that it was coming from female commanding officers, I imagine, is what you're referring to. There is something there for men to learn, like on a high level, not just like in the military. It's like women know some shit. Number one, learn to listen. Number two, how are they so honest compared to men? And what I think, and I'm super curious what you think, I call it like men's hearts are either open or they're closed. They either have a shield around their heart or they don't. Not most women, that's not really the right thing to say because women shield their hearts too, but they're led more by their heart than men are, I believe. You think of that though?
Yeah, I mean, the one point you made right there, this should be said that we're painting with very broad brushes here. Uh, there's elements of men, there's elements of women that cross over here. But by and large, I think there is a biological difference where biological women can bring life into this world. Men cannot. When a woman is pregnant, growing a human inside, things are going crazy. I mean, the chemistry and the hormones and any kind of unforeseen issue requires a level of adaptability, but also you can't fake it till you make it through something like that. That's nature at work. And this could all apply to the military. It could apply to corporate structures. It could apply to any hierarchical system. I found that the men in our field at that time this was almost like their way of trying to manifest their outcome. And maybe a little irrationally, maybe unrealistically, thinking confidence will create. And when it didn't, then that's like the biggest bruise to an ego is my mission is failing or not going according to plan. And that could be a metaphor for any facet of our life. Like Mike Tyson would say, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And we started this conversation talking about how not a matter of if, but when the universe is going to punch you in the face.
And there comes the adaptability.
Yeah.
It's like I think it's an underspoken about trait that men need to have. And I don't know if it's like fighting biology because we're not as wired biologically to be as adaptable, but I'm fucking telling you, man, it makes a difference if you learn how to be adaptable.
You see it in every quote unquote successful person in their field has a very clear level of adaptability. I mean, here we are in the USA. It's free agency for the NFL. Football players are getting traded around. You think of a quarterback, it traditionally would stand in the pocket, do his read throughs, choose his target, throw the ball. These days, that's old school. Coaches are looking for that adaptable quarterback who can throw the ball, but is also ready to scramble, ready to pitch, ready to make something up on the fly. Just watch the way Patrick Mahomes operates. It's crazy sometimes what he comes up with, and I'm sure he doesn't even know he's doing it, but he's trained so hard that he can go lights out and win 3 Super Bowls.
Do you see your adaptability skills that you've developed show up in your romantic relationship?
That's specific. Yeah. In my romantic relationship, my adaptability, the having exercised that muscle as much as I have, allows me, and not all the time, mind you, but does allow me often to be able to stop and try to step outside of myself before so I can respond rather than react. And I liken it to a bomb that's going to go off and it's got the fuse, and we all have different lengths of fuses, and when it burns down we have an explosion of some sort, whether internal, external, whatever that looks like for an individual. I'm just looking to just snip the fuse to break that and stop it from burning down so that I can step back and assess. My adaptability has allowed me to survey the situation and not feel like I'm stuck in a situation, but gives me the confidence that I can rework a situation for a desired outcome. And I'm constantly reminding myself in an argument in my relationship, I ask myself one question: in this argument, do I want to be right or do I want to be in love? And if trying to be right is going to hurt the person I love, I need to adapt.
Think like it's pretty interesting this has even come up because it's one of the key things I teach guys is like you got to adapt. Like old school 1950s lockdown way of thinking about relationships is gonna it's gonna get you shot theoretically, like
Mhm.
not theoretically, metaphorically. That's the word I was trying to come up with.
Mhm.
Literally, because it it doesn't work anymore. Adaptability will get you more of what you want in your relationship.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Being
What
rigid, being rigid with your beliefs, with your idea of the way things should be, it's not going to work.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on something that I've heard come up a few times in the channels that I follow, the concept of compromise. Where do you stand on compromise in a relationship?
I think the word is tricky. I think the language doesn't really do it. I think it's not represented well. When you hear compromise, most people think like backing down. That's not what it is. I
Mm.
think healthy. I'm gonna switch the word to negotiation in relationship is actually what we mean.
Mhm.
Because compromise, I hear self betrayal, and then you're screwed.
Mm.
So I think negotiation is a more accurate thing because, like, I don't want to say it's give and take, but you have to understand, especially with where we are at with social media being bombarded on like, you should stand up for your rights in relationship. It's like, yeah, yes. And you're going to be fucking lonely if you have like 100 checkpoint list and somebody doesn't like meet all those things. You're going to be alone. So you need to figure out how to negotiate with your partner on some of the things and yourself.
Mm.
Because if you get super fucking honest and you actually do the proper inner work, you'll probably find that most of those things that you want or think you need are based in a wound anyway and are actually not healthy.
Well said.
Doesn't mean you can't negotiate them. But if you're going to be rigid on it, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I find that as well, that even agreeing to disagree is still agreement, you know? If you go through the work and you unpack these things and you realize you just have different stances on something. Here we are in a year where a quarter of the world, for the first time in human history, 2 billion people are going to the polls this year to vote. Okay. I am so interested to listen to where people are coming from and how they perceive what's happening and how they gauge where we're going. I don't have any interest in somebody paying me lip service or just agreeing with how I'm going to vote. I have had conversations with people who consistently vote the complete opposite from how I do, but they have so much to back up their reasoning, and they inspire me to dig deeper into my own reasoning, and they give me hope and faith that our system of built on healthy discourse is still alive and well. And I champion for those people who are dedicated to walking their walk, talking their talk, and backing it up. Um, I think in relationship as well, especially romantic relationship, understanding not the what the differences are necessary, but the why. why am I resisting doing that thing that she's asking me to do? Why does it seem like my story, she is deliberately not doing that thing I've asked her to do, whatever it is. But then getting into the weeds and actually meeting in the middle and backing up what we are asking for or what our non-negotiables are, um, and giving the other one an opportunity to tell us from their mouth how they feel rather than just processing it as a story in our head. That right there has been it's been not only our saving grace in relationship, but has propelled us to a place where we're growing together and could never imagine any other way.
That's fantastic. I I'm gonna admit something that I referred to what happened 10 days ago. And what I realized is that I was using our differences of opinion and different viewpoints of seeing things to make myself smarter and better than her. That was my mask. And I'm like, that's complete horseshit. Like, that's fundamentally not what I believe, but I'm sharing this because your subconscious, it will do funny things to try to protect you, right? And that was one. I'm like, oh my God, I literally, my subconscious thinks I'm better than her. I'm like, I'm going to be alone if I like can't figure that shit out and figure out the triggers that make me, go down a path that I don't like.
I'm only laughing because my conscious has been caught doing that. And
Well, I was going to ask you though, like growing up, in a school that was so diverse, it it must have helped you like find some humility and not think you were better than other people because of different language, different culture. Do you find that, or was it just
on the I mean, on the contrary, I found myself actually, maybe not even so secretly, wanting to relate through struggle.
mm,
Because I felt like with two parents at home and in a nice home without, in a safe neighborhood, it was different than a lot of the kids I went to school with. And that made me different at a time when no kid wants to feel different. And
yeah,
so I actually, it was actually, it agitated me. I wanted to be more like them. And there were points where, yeah, I ultimately my family melted apart, and my parents got very divorced, and they've since both passed away, and like things came off the rails. But at that time, I could only see that I was different, and I saw the bond between some of those kids uh, that was founded in their adversity that they faced on a daily basis, and I didn't have that.
is actually quite profound. Let me run something by you, kind of based on what you just said. I believe strongly there is more intimacy to be had through conflict. So do you think what you witnessed as a kid and that struggle slash, it wasn't really conflict, but do you think there's something to that?
100, 1,000%. Yeah. I refer to, a lot of people have read Sebastian Unger's book Tribe, and he writes about that, and specifically war times when people
Mm.
later reflect back on those times. You know, very much they were the best of times, they were the worst of times. They reflect back on it because of the camaraderie or the connection.
Isn't that fascinating? And yet, daily in a romantic relationship, we're given the same opportunity.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Okay, I'm watching the clock here. I got 3 questions for you.
Fire away.
Do real men cry?
all the time.
What is something you would like to say to a former version of yourself?
Happiness is an inside job.
What message would you like to send to men listening to this?
I would say to men listening like that, or to this, first and foremost, like I hope most would say, is that you're not alone. First and foremost, I would refer to probably one of my favorite quotes, Wayne Dyer, that says, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I'm reading the Kabbalion, and the law of mentalism, or everything in the universe is mental. We're all living in our own life with our own story, and we're meaning making machines. We have the capacity to change what things mean to us, and every single day we have that capacity.
Dude, every time I record one of these, I'm blown away by the conversations, and this one just like the like context and the flavor of it was phenomenal. Like, I'm so grateful for your time.
Appreciate the space you hold, man. It's very welcoming, and it encourages share.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. You got it.
Thanks for taking the time to be here today. I honestly hope you found something you can use in your life. And I hope you found some relief in knowing that you're not the only one with challenges. We can be very isolated as men. If you don't have support in your life, please reach out to someone. It's okay to need help. It doesn't mean that you're less of a man. In fact, it takes a courageous man to know when it's time to ask for guidance. Until next time, brother.